In this last video now I would like to talk a little bit about the rendering. And that seems to be always a very daunting task for people who are new to it. And of course, if you just sit in front of the software, it's really difficult to know what to do if you have no understanding of maybe what you should look for, because the software is just a software, it doesn't do a rendering for you. So if you never really did this before, you're new, there are a few steps you can make it easy for you. For example, you could go to Google and type in Photo Studio. And let's take a look. The reason why I, for example, say that is you can use those as a reference for example, how big are your lights? Where are your lights? How is maybe the environment done? Because to get really good realistic rendering, you need not only to have a backdrop and some lights, you also need to have an environment. That is something a lot of people at the beginning always forget. Let's take a look, for example, here. You see like a really big floodlight from the left, a very big light from the top, and a small spot. And then there's a picture snapped. Let's take a look into car photography. Let's see what we find there. Studio. This is, for example, a nice one. It shows you like the grayish backdrop. There are some lights that are actually casting light patterns onto the wall and not the car. And then you see that the front corner is very dark. So most of the white on the car is actually the ray trace reflection of the white of the backdrop, similar to here. So again, that is where, for example, a realistic shader like the Mia material with real reflections works better than something like Phong or Blinn with a fake specular highlight. And there are actually really a lot of different images you can take a look at. It's also good maybe to consult like a photo magazine. I mean, I do a lot of product renderings, so I'm very familiar with this. And for example, this is a nice picture because you see the highlights of the floor, some highlights or reflections of the light, the hood blends into the backdrop. This is all ray traced reflection. And that is what then gives you kind of like a nice natural look. So let's go to Maya and let's try to apply that. So let's create a large plane where we put our object onto. And maybe here, let's extrude this one out. So here's like my backdrop. Okay. Now let's turn this one into a smooth preview. So my backdrop is nicely arced. Maybe actually, let's go to edge, select this one, move this one over to there, and then from here, extrude out another part. Okay. So that is okay. Before we start rendering, what you want to do is go to the render settings, go to render options, and turn enable default light off. Currently, we also keep final gathering turned off. Because what I would like to show you first is how to set up the lights and also how to change the lights so they react more like realistic lights in real life, unlike the more kind of hard to control lights for motion graphics. So we can go create an area light. Let's move this light to there. And then create a locator. If you have one or two lights in the camera, maybe looking through the light is a better approach, like panel then look through. But if you have multiple lights, you don't necessarily want to switch your view all the time, specifically when you quickly want to make renderings and adjust those or use the interactive render preview. And actually also using lights with a target or an empty or a locator is very common in my area. So I go to animation, constraint, aim, and then here we have to figure out what I need. And I think this is the correct value, -1, so X, Y, and Z. See, Z is here. So let's apply. And I would like the light to look along -Z. So blue is Z, -Z. Okay, so because the nice thing is if I now position this one to somewhere and use this one, it's kind of like child and parent. Well, whatever you click first is actually the child, and now this is the child. No, wait, the parent, and the light is the child. No, this is the child, and this one is a parent. Or I'm getting confused. So let's go into top view, and maybe put this one to there. And then maybe change the scale a little bit. And put this one up, maybe to there. Okay, so let's do a rendering. Let's see what we get. One of the problems you will see immediately is this is totally blown out. This is way too bright. And that is, again, because this light is currently, I'm going to say, like a generic light type. And what the key is how it emits light and from where to where the light energy will fall off. So what we're going to do now is go to mental ray, say use light shape, invisible. In shadows, we would like to have ray trace shadows. We have strong computers today, so we can use that. And then for custom shader, inside the mental ray tab, click on it, and then go to mental ray lights, physical light. And inside color, click on it, go back to mental ray lights, and black body. So the physical light basically defines now how the light physics work, how this area light is illuminating the scene. And the black body is defining the intensity, so the strength, and the color temperature. So for example, let's say we set this to kind of like a warm light, 5500 degree Kelvin. And let's do a snapshot. And it's pretty dark. Well, that is because the intensity probably is way too low. So let's set this to 100. And it's good practice to always play with really drastic settings at the beginning. So not that you play with small mini values and nothing changes and you think actually nothing works, but actually it does work, it's just too low. And there we see now the rendering slightly coming out, and this brownish is because of this 5000. So if we set this, for example, to 6500, let's keep this image and render. You see now this is more whitish or bluish actually. See that? So there you can play with the light settings. You also notice that there is no majorly large burnout happening. Of course, when I bring this light very close, then it will overflood that area with light. and then it will look slightly bad again. So maybe this light we position to somewhere there. So, and maybe move my camera to here. This means this one should be a little bit wider so it fills my screen nicely. Okay, let's do a rendering. Okay, now this strong highlight I see here, that is because of the big area light I have there. So if I now move this area light maybe to somewhere over here, and let's see what happens now. Still a little bit there. And of course we can also play with the strength. So this should also anyway be kind of like a fill light. So good. Okay. Now let's, for example, create another light. So area light here, and let's move this one to there. Let's move this one up there. Actually, I'm going to move this one first to here, and then I'll rotate this slightly, because this should shoot out a little bit of light to there. This one is still, for my taste, too strong, so I temporarily tone this one down actually a lot. And then here I do the same, light shader, mental ray lights, physical light, color, mental ray lights, and black body, maybe 50, actually let's say 150. And there are a few settings we have to do. So use light shape, it should be visible. And use the shadows, ray trace shadows. Okay, good. Let's see how this looks. So there now, for example, you can see how this is shooting out light towards there. But my material is way too over reflective, so I should go ahead and maybe lower this. Well, this should be fabric and not polished chrome, so those reflection values are way too strong. See there? That is now getting a little bit better. So maybe we can create one more light, and let's move this light to somewhere there. Let's move this one up and there. Scale it up a little bit and rotate it. This one, for example, I would kind of like hit my object from here. So when I take a look at this light from here, I have a little bit of diffuse light coming from the top. This area light, because it sees the shoe from here, illuminates most of the stuff here. And then this light I can leave here, so it shines on here. I could actually also place a light to here, so it can cast a rim light on the object. You're not necessarily limited to only 3 lights. You can have as many lights as you want, but it's good to start with 2 or 3 and then step by step increase the amount of lights if needed, so you don't create a too complicated light rig, and then you basically spend more time tweaking all the different lights till something looks good, instead of just starting with a very small and simple approach and then fine-tuning it afterwards. So I'm going to take a look from further back so I can see how each light works on my scene. And there you see this starts getting to work a little bit better. Now here's a small tip about trying to figure out maybe how lights can influence your environment. So I go to color, and let's say this one I set to 2000. Does it allow it? Let's see. Yeah, so this is like super warm. And there we can see like how much this orange light illuminates the front of the shoe. And I can clearly see where, for example, this light, which is whitish, overlaps, like here. So this is, for example, a nice approach to play with different settings when you're not necessarily sure about how each light is affecting your environment, and you would like to have a little bit more control over it. A secondary approach would be maybe using layers. Let's say this one and this one we put onto this layer. This layer we put this light we put onto this layer. So if I do a rendering now, I only see this light. If I turn that layer off and turn the other one on, I see those two lights working. Maybe make another layer here, put it on here, and then maybe I could call this top light, right light, and left light. See, I don't necessarily call those right now fill key light, etc., because who knows if I really want all the light coming from the left. Well, actually, for product renderings in general, most light should come from the left side, but for composition purpose, sometimes you want it to be from the right side or more from the top. So all those can be fill key or whatever light based on which way they have to work inside your scene. So that's basically kind of like how you could quickly set up a basic environment. And one thing is left to make renderings look good, that is final gathering. So I went to the render settings, indirect lighting, left those at the default settings for the moment, and let's click render. And what does final gathering basically do? Think about it, if you're in a room and the windows are open and outside it's daylight, no light is really shooting in or shining into the room, but the room is still bright. That's indirect light. And final gathering is to a certain degree adjusting or simulating that. So kind of like diffuse or bounce light. And you have various settings like accuracy or point density. The more you lower them, the worse the result, but the faster the rendering. Maybe let's put this one to 10 and 0.5. You will see how speedy this calculation properly will be. Because at the beginning of a rendering or a process, it doesn't make sense to work with high quality settings, because you're not really you're wasting time. Then when you have basically everything set up nicely, then you can go ahead and increase the render settings. And maybe this light is a little bit too close, so I move it to there. Let's move this one up a little bit and rotate it. And at this point, maybe it might make sense to go into this layout. Hold on, because I'm doing a screen recording, my screen is rather small, so I'm going to open this into its individual window. So that in here I can comfortably move around, and then, for example, with this rendering engine working, I can go ahead and play with those values. Well, maybe 200. Let's see. 300. This one here on top seems to be a little bit too dim. And then you would basically start balancing out all your different lights. There you see with this big light being stronger, the whole rendering got a little bit more of energy, got brighter. Maybe this one is too strong. And let's go to this one and say maybe 250. And that's the left light. This light, for example, maybe I don't want it to be where it is right now. Maybe I want to move it to there. Let's see how it works. And you see that's a nice element of the interactive renderer. I can now play with my lights and move them around, and then quickly get some render previews. See now how it's casting more light onto this part. This front is darker, and then I get more light on here. So I will leave it at this point. Let me show you how you can, for example, get much better render quality. So once you're done, obviously, you can go to the quality and go to production quality. And I hope Maya just didn't crash. Okay, I'm back. Maya didn't crash, but I just had the interactive renderer working in the backdrop. So that was the reason why everything slowed down for a moment. So I'm setting maybe things to good production quality, and there are a lot of other settings we don't necessarily have time right now to go into. But if you Google those online, you will find plenty of information about them. So let's maybe make a nice look like this one, and this backdrop has to rotate a little bit like this, and let's do a rendering, because there are a few settings left you can play with. So for those area lights, for example, let's select one. You have, for example, high sample, low sample. If we start increasing those values, then the graininess of the rendering will over time get smaller. So because currently I'm still working with very, very low values. So it's not only that you have the settings here for the anti-aliasing, but also for the individual area lights. And the same, like if your reflections are too blurry or too grainy, sorry, you could also go to the mirror material, and then here you have glossy samples. If I set this one to 2, it will look really, really bad. If I set this to 20, it will look actually a lot better. Also, nicely about the mirror materials, if you move your mouse over like a function, you will get a small pop-up or tool note telling you what this thing is actually doing. And ultimately the last thing to show you is actually what we can do with the camera, because Mental Ray has a camera that can be worked with as well. So for example, here I have my perspective camera. I went to the camera node. Here I have Mental Ray, and here I have lens shaders. Now if I click on this checkboard, I could go to Mental Ray, lenses, and then I have depth of field, and for example I have lens bokeh, and I have exposure options. So for example, let's go to here, one down, and create a lens photographic. So what I did was basically I added a lens shader, so you can have one or you can have multiple stacked. So what does this photographic do? It's actually working like a camera. So you have ISO, you have shutter, you have f-stop, and then there's something which is really nice, burn highlights, crush blacks, saturation, because your eye is biological and can adjust between very dark and very bright contrasts. A film camera cannot, so you can expose a film for a dark environment or a bright environment, but not both at the same time. So let's say we set this one to 800 and maybe this one to 10. So let's see how this will look like. And it's very, very dark. That's because of the settings I have. So if I now set the shutter to 1, let's see. You see now there's a lot more brightness in the scene. And 0.1. So in case you're familiar with digital SLR photography, that is something you can actually make use of. So you have total control over how Mental Ray is going to render your scene. And you might also notice that the glariness in this rendering is gone. And that is because, again, I'm not using a Maya typical camera for rendering. I'm using the Mental Ray camera for the rendering. And basically, crush blacks, that basically if you, let's see, maybe let's go extreme. And I will show you what those do. Burn highlights, as you can see now, the rendering is a little bit brighter. So if you have really super bright areas, they can be a little bit stronger. If you set this to 0, the software tries to tone down overexposed areas. So let's keep this one and let's see how, for example, the darks got darker because crush blacks, it's kind of like darkening dark areas, and then the burn highlights made the brights come in a little bit better. And then you also have saturation. That will make colors then pop a little better. So to a certain degree, that is a little bit what you maybe would do in Photoshop with the levels or exposure, but you can do this right inside Mental Ray with the exposure photographic lens shader.